Have you ever heard of the architect of nightmares, a monster conjured by Dostoevsky? At first glance, his artworks might simply seem like paintings. They're somewhat dark, occasionally overtly candid, but within 30 seconds, you realize you're holding your breath. Another minute passes and you find yourself unsure of where to direct your gaze. A sense of unease envelops you, unconnected to the scene on the canvas, as your deepest nightmare manifests before you. This is the work of Nerdrum. If his name doesn't ring a bell, you're not alone. His name has been deliberately erased from biennials, prestigious competitions, book indexes, and discussions among the educated. He isn't just an outsider in the art world, he's a thorn in its side, a painter whose exceptional skill turned into a crime. He's been officially barred from creating art, tried and sentenced with a prohibition against producing artworks. Nerdrum is like a modern-day Rembrandt, exiled from the art community for heresy, a notorious Norwegian betrayed by his homeland and condemned as a dangerous individual. Nerdrum is an ardent admirer of Dostoevsky, not in the sense of reading him casually in the evenings, but as a heretic who has memorized crime and punishment. He speaks of Dostoevsky as if he were a prophet, quotes him in interviews, and paints as though he hears Raskolnikov's voice in his mind. His interests lie in literature with mystical and metaphysical elements. Among his favorite authors are Rudolf Steiner, William Blake, and Emanuel Swedenborg. He detests Vermeer for being too beautiful and despises Warhol for being overly commercial. He scoffs at modernism and pop art, viewing them as degradation, such as Nerdrum's disdain for modernism that he once controversially remarked about Picasso. Hitler was the better artist, not because he sought to shock, but because he understood that such statements would be unforgettable or whispered about, an enduring way to be remembered by an era that no longer reads. Early years and the influence of an esoteric school. He was born on April 8, 1944, in a refuge in Sweden, where his parents, who were part of the Norwegian resistance, had fled to escape the Nazi occupation. After the war ended, they returned to Norway, but the family soon fell apart. His father vanished from their lives and was later revealed not to have been his biological father. Even on his deathbed, he specifically forbade Nerdrum from attending his funeral. His mother stayed with him, stern, cold, and intellectual, firmly believing that faith was for the uneducated. His stepfather was an enlightened modernist who collected abstract art and spoke like a museum curator. During one walk at sunset, his stepfather made a remark that etched itself into the aspiring artist's memory. "It's beautiful, but if you paint something like this, they won't accept you at the autumn exhibition." This statement would haunt Nerdrum throughout his life. Instead of attending a traditional school, he was sent by his enlightened parents to Rudolf Steiner's Esoteric Center, a children's experimental school rooted in anthroposophy. There, rather than being taught to think critically, students were encouraged to remember themselves in harmony with the cosmos through reading, painting, movement, dreams, and strange practices that blurred the lines between body and spirit. Quite extraordinary for a child, isn't it? This unique educational experience gifted him with a sense that reality was something else entirely, something he would reflect on later in life. Education and conflict with modernism. In 1962, he enrolled at the National Academy of Arts in Oslo, where he encountered not an aesthetic, but a notable lack thereof. All applicants were required to submit 3 pieces for evaluation. 2 of the paintings Odd submitted were crafted in his distinctive style. However, the 3rd was merely a hastily done sketch that Nerdrum hadn't managed to complete. Ironically, it was this unfinished piece that impressed the admissions committee and secured his entry into the country's premier art school. This experience led Nerdrum to question the criteria that define the value of modernist painting, which seemed to demand so little effort and skill. At the academy, he found himself being taught everything but painting: modernism, structuralism, pop culture, detached perspectives, and social commentary. Standing before these abstract canvases, his thoughts drifted to Caravaggio, Rembrandt, about hands that still emit light, about bodies seemingly brought to life on canvas. He decided to abandon the curriculum, fashion trends, and contemporary influence. Rejection of modernity. The formation of style. In this act of defiance emerged his unique language, a language of the old world seen through the lens of the 21st century. Naturally, this led to his expulsion. He then travelled to Dusseldorf and enrolled in another academy for another attempt at integrating into the system. Yet again, he faced profound miscommunication. Around him was a discourse filled with forms, structures, and artistic declarations. Everyone spoke of composition, concepts, methods, while he focused on suffering and silence that needed no explanation. At that moment, he made a choice that would shape his entire future: to remain isolated from art that turned painting into mere illustration of ideas. In the early 70s, Nerdrum returned to first exhibitions and controversies. Upon arriving in Norway, he quickly found himself at the heart of a controversy. He organised his first solo exhibition, which was met with predictably hostile reactions. Reflecting later, he admitted that despite his efforts to carve a path in the art world of the late 60s and 70s, he was constantly reminded of words once spoken by his stepfather. The response to his work was even more negative than what Edvard Munch faced when he became a modernist after confronting public opinion. He tried with all his might to be the best artist he could be. By the late 70s, he began to realise that this was precisely where he went wrong. Two of his pieces, The Arrest and The Murder of Andreas Baader, were supposed to be part of an exhibition for which there was an entry fee. However, they were removed before the opening, with the explanation that all decorations had to be cleared from the gallery space. It was then that he understood he wasn't truly an artist. Critics were outraged by the content, technique, and even the mere existence of his work. How dare a young artist disregard Klee or Picasso? How could he reject everything Europe had boasted about for the past 50 years? He wasn't just challenging modernism. He refused to acknowledge it as an artistic reality and didn't engage in its discourse, simply because he didn't understand its language. I'm not an artist. With this statement, he publicly declares his stance. I am not an artist, I am a creator of kitsch. While it might sound like an aesthetic provocation, it truly reflects his position, which I'll delve into a bit later. He revisits figurative painting, focusing on chiaroscuro and the physical form's plasticity. By studying the techniques of old masters, even crafting paints using 15th century recipes, he attempts to literally reconstruct lost technologies, as if trying to revive a culture that no longer exists. Now let's take a closer look at his portrayal of Andreas Baader's demise, which he has discussed. Andreas Baader was a figure who instilled fear, was demonized, and yet secretly respected in post-war West Germany. As one of the founders of the Red Army faction, RAF, a radical left organization, Baader led underground resistance efforts. He turned the fight against the system into a bloody war through arson, kidnappings, murders, and actions against bankers, industrialists, and government officials, all outside the logical frameworks of liberal democracy. The RAF played by different rules, prompting a harsher response from the system than is commonly acknowledged. In October 1977, following the high-profile Lufthansa plane hijacking and Hans Martin Schleyer's assassination, German special forces launched a swift operation. Hostages were freed. On the morning of October 18th in Stamheim, prison occurred an event official history still notes with caution. Good morning. 3 RAF leaders were found dead in their cells. Baader with a bullet wound to the back of his head. Gudrun Ensslin hanged with an electrical cord. Jan Karl Rasper shot in the head. Only Ingrid Müller survived despite multiple stab wounds to her chest, still alive. The suicide theory seemed rather tenuous at best. Nerdrum observed these events from afar without delving into details, but chose instead to depict the scene as if it were truly an execution. While the German state closed the case, Nerdrum reopened it in art form. He arranged the composition inspired by Caravaggio's teachings, akin to St. Peter's crucifixion, contrasting light and darkness. The victim stands illuminated at the centre, completely vulnerable and exposed, while the executioner lurks in shadow with weapon drawn but face obscured. He wasn't advocating violence nor idealising Baader. Instead, he saw him as someone contemporary society decided not to discuss, but rather swiftly eliminate without trial or cameras. The painting sparked outrage, as intended. In Norway, people were shocked that anyone would grant this artist the right to side with a terrorist. In Germany, there was near hysteria. The wound from 1977 had not yet healed, and here he was, tearing it open with his finger, yet Nerdrum was not interested in politics. What captivated him was the mechanics of hypocrisy wrapped in the colourful guise of democracy. The very notion that a state preaching humanism could deal with an opponent as if they were a mere flaw in the system deeply disturbed him. In Bada, he saw a martyr, not a saint, but someone condemned. This was a continuation of themes he explored in earlier works like Mourning or Abandoned, where the lone figure, an outcast rejected by the system, became the focal point. A man in a cocoon, a dead butterfly in an empty desert that could never be reborn. Radical realism and technique. His painting style can be described as radical realism. Nerdrum consistently pushes the boundaries in his work. He captures skin, bones, and fabric with an almost painfully precise accuracy. This hyper-realism dissolves the distance between the viewers and the paintings, compelling them to perceive the imaginary world as physically possible. While this is a classic Baroque technique, he reinterprets it uniquely. He adopts techniques from old masters like Rembrandt and Caravaggio, but infuses them with themes of loss, fear, and bodily isolation, creating cognitive dissonance. The form appears classical, yet it carries a destructive modern content. His works rarely have clear narratives. They are fragments, scenes from unknown dramas. This approach aligns them with dreams, particularly unsettling ones devoid of logic but filled with existential threat, which is why his works often inspire horror films. Influence on cinema. The Cell movie. He is often referred to as an architect of nightmares. One of Nerdrum's most famous pieces, Dawn, was displayed in David Bowie's home for many years. Bowie, a collector deeply moved by this artwork, found it profoundly impactful. Dawn served as the inspiration for a scene in Tarsem Singh's film, The Cell. According to Singh, upon first seeing Nerdrum's painting at Bowie's home, he experienced such a strong visual and emotional shock that he instantly envisioned a scene for his future film. The scene mirrors Nerdrum's painting, both compositionally and stylistically. Static human figures in an empty, hypnotic space, silent screams frozen on their lips, paradoxical light that offers no warmth, and an atmosphere of terror that seems to suffocate from within. Nerdrum's compositions are so self-sufficient and cinematic that they require no interpretation. They become ready-made sets for nightmares, waiting only for actors and cameras to bring them to life. In 2011, Nerdrum faced legal challenges regarding the legal case and tax scandal, a criminal case that drew attention not only within Norway, but also internationally involved financial misconduct. The artist faced charges of concealing income amounting to approximately 14 million Norwegian kroner, roughly $1 million, with some of these funds allegedly held in bank accounts in Austria. From the outset, however, the case exhibited characteristics suggesting it was less about taxes and more about a legal attempt to neutralize an artist perceived as a systemic threat. Specifically, it was noted that the disputed money was set aside by Nerdrum himself for restoring his own artworks. This involved preserving pieces in his private collection and fulfilling commitments he made regarding their maintenance. The issue arose from certain artworks he created through experiments with traditional methods, which resulted in paint that melted and chipped in warm environments, causing the paintings to quickly deteriorate. Nerdrum conscientiously repainted these works and compensated the owners for their losses. However, both the original pieces and their replacements were subject to taxation, leading to the establishment of a special fund in Austria, which aroused suspicion among Norwegian tax authorities. Despite this, the court determined these actions constituted intentional tax evasion. The case spanned several years and went through 4 judicial levels. In 2014, despite multiple defense arguments and evident procedural inconsistencies, a final verdict was issued, 1 year of imprisonment and 8 months of house arrest. However, the primary focus remained on the ban on painting creation. Community reaction. The key aspect of this decision wasn't its duration, but the prohibition of professional activity. The official ban on creating new paintings. Can you even imagine? This particular point sparked widespread public outrage. Essentially, it wasn't the sale of artwork that was prohibited, but their creation itself. By Norwegian standards, this was considered excessively harsh. People often receive probation for more serious offences, yet the court failed to provide any evidence of intent and did not even consider the defence's arguments. A paradox emerged as the state effectively deemed the act of painting a crime. Both the Norwegian and international art communities viewed this verdict as an act of cultural censorship disguised as a formal legal procedure. This is especially significant given that Nerdrum had been openly opposing Norway's official cultural policies for decades. He consistently criticised modernist aesthetics and created works that provoked political and ideological irritation. During his final statement in court, the artist explicitly stated that he saw the trial as politically motivated. Verdict and its motivation. He declared, "I am not being judged for taxes. I am being judged for not abandoning figurative painting, for continuing to paint as if tradition is still alive. My only fault is that I don't suit those in power." Notably, during this period, he created one of his most significant works, a self-portrait as a dog. This work is one of the artist's most insightful pieces. In this painting, the artist depicts himself as a creature stripped of dignity, placed in a position where it must either submit or vanish. The painting serves as a visual metaphor for current events, illustrating how the individual has been essentially deprived of the right to artistic expression. The figure is shown in a bent, distinctly vulnerable pose, with an intense gaze directed straight at the viewer. The body's posture highlights not so much its animalistic nature, but rather a state of humiliation, isolation, and inner resistance. Executed in Nerdrum's characteristic technique, the work uses soft crayonna and complex muted tones against a neutral, almost monochrome background. The composition is deliberately devoid of context to focus entirely on the psychological state of the figure. Despite its zoomorphic form, the painting does not evoke associations with allegory or metaphor. It is truly a self-portrait depicting the artist's position within a system that confines him. By the early 2000s, Odd Nerdrum had fully articulated his artistic and philosophical stance through what he termed a conceptual manifesto of kitsch. In this text, he presents himself not only as an artist, but also as a theorist who intentionally opposes contemporary norms dictated by official institutions. He emphasizes a critical distinction between art and kitsch. Nerdrum argues that these categories represent fundamentally different models of artistic thinking. He perceives art as a product of the modernist era, something he detests, focusing on novelty, conceptuality, and internal detachment. For instance, he cannot comprehend works like Malevich's Square or Kandinsky's compositions. Such art distances itself from the viewer and thus fails to resonate. It is dead in his eyes. In contrast to this modernist art, Nerdrum speaks about kitsch. Not the kitsch we might typically think of, but rather a form of expression grounded in craftsmanship and emotional involvement. According to his definition, kitsch is not a secondary or diluted form of art. It cannot be reduced to commercial production or sentimentality in painting. In contrast, Nerdrum's approach to kitsch is an independent system centered on human experience, encompassing suffering, beauty, and death. He suggests that if Rembrandt were painting today, his works might be labeled as kitsch due to their sensitivity, tragedy, and misalignment with the ideals of contemporary art. By saying this, Nerdrum subtly implies a parallel between himself and Rembrandt. For Nerdrum, kitsch is neither a genre nor a style. Instead, it represents an ethical stance where painting remains a direct form of human expression, life in exile, creating outside the system. After concluding his legal battle and serving his sentence, Odd Nerdrum permanently left his homeland of Norway. He withdrew from public debates, no longer attempting to challenge the court's decision or prove anything to the art community. Since then, he has been residing and working in Iceland, leading a secluded life while continuing to craft his nightmarish artworks in a studio designed to mirror those of the old masters. He still prepares his own paints and refines his painting technique within the realms of artisanal precision and tradition. Now in his 70s, Nerdrum remains an artist who steadfastly maintains an independent stance. His art exists outside of time and beyond any system, which is precisely what makes him such a compelling figure. I hope you enjoyed this edition. Please subscribe to my channel, give it a thumbs up, and share your thoughts in the comments section.